All right, we are going to start your notes over World War II, and this is just going to be part one. So it's just going to be the first kind of section of notes here that we're going to take over kind of the beginning and the start of World War II. So we know at the end of World War I, the state of Europe is not good. A lot of the governments are going to fall to totalitarianism. Fascism and Nazism are going to be on the rise, and you're going to have countries like Italy and Germany, and they're going to be very hungry for that military conquest. Remember, we talked about fascism being extreme nationalism, and Nazism is going to have some of those same components. So those two countries are going to have a lot of desire for military conquest, while the other nations in Europe are really just going to be kind of distracted and their hands full with the other economic problems. But you have to also remember Japan. Japan was going through a time of lots of industrialization. They were very successful with industrialization, but they needed raw materials and they needed markets for their industries. So they are going to invest in a region of China, in northern China, in Manchuria, because Manchuria is going to be rich in iron and coal. And so they are going to exercise some Japanese imperialism on that area. They're going to go in and seize control. And the Japanese army is going to establish a puppet government in Manchuria so that Japan can take advantage of the resources in that region. And so this attack on Manchuria is going to be the first violation of the League of Nations. The League is going to protest this invasion, but Japan withdrew from the League of Nations in 1933, so there's really not a whole lot they can do about it. So you have Japanese imperialism that's going to start brewing in China. So let's stop and think. How did Japanese imperialism contribute to the start of World War II? Go ahead and stop the video, and based on what I just talked about, go ahead and record your answer. All right, so you've had the Japanese imperialism. We've had some aggression on China. And once they are in China, there's going to be a border dispute between Japan and China on July 7th in 1937. And this is going to start a war in China. And eventually what's going to happen is the cities of Beijing and Nanjing are going to fall to Japan. So that is going to be one act of aggression that goes on in Asia. And then in Europe, you're going to have Mussolini is going to order an attack on Ethiopia in 1935. Ethiopia is going to fall to Italy, and they're going to appeal to the League of Nations for some help. But the League of Nations is not going to do anything. I know we talked after World War I about some of the weaknesses of the League of Nations. Well, they really don't have any policing power, and so the League of Nations is not really going to take any action against Italy for that. Another thing that is going to cause war is Hitler is going to refuse to uphold the Treaty of Versailles. He does not want to pay the war reparations. He does not want to accept the war guilt that Germany was left with after World War I. So he's not going to pay the war reparations, and the League of Nations is also not going to do anything about that. They're not going to enforce. And so that's just going to encourage Hitler to continue with his plans of aggression. So after that, Hitler is going to enter the Rhineland, and the Rhineland is just going to be this little area of northern France between France and Germany. And the French were stunned. They felt threatened, and they felt like Hitler was coming toward them to initiate war. But the British are going to urge this policy of appeasement. And appeasement is just kind of what we've seen from the League of Nations, is it's basically allowing the enemy to do whatever they want in order to keep the peace. So giving in for the purpose of keeping peace. And we're going to see that throughout the beginning of World War II, because they didn't want to initiate another war. They don't want to start, but it's going to end up hurting them. So Hitler enters the Rhineland, and that is going to be a turning point in the march towards war, because the League of Nations is not going to act on it. So that's just going to strengthen Hitler's power. It's going to put the power in Hitler's favor, because the League of Nations doesn't do anything about it. They allow him to do that. So that's just going to prove that he's going to have the power to go through with his aggression. And because the others didn't have any response, because the other nations are going to follow the policy of appeasement, he's going to build up his military. So that's really going to start initiating the start of World War II. After Hitler does this, Mussolini in Italy, he is going to decide to create an alliance with Germany, and that's going to be known as the Rome-Berlin Axis. And they are eventually going to make up what is known as the Axis powers. So Japan, Italy, and Germany are going to execute aggression, and the League of Nations is really not going to do much about it, and that is going to kind of set the tone for the beginnings of World War II. German and Italian troops in the Axis the Axis powers are going to help the Spanish Civil War in favor of the Spanish fascist Franco Francisco. And so Spain in Europe is also going to fall to fascist rule. So that is going to cause some tension and problems in Europe. This is a map of the Rhineland, so we can see it's this area here in Germany that's in the northern part of France that's going to border for the French. It's going to be on the French border. And so that's going to really threaten the French and make them very nervous of some future aggressions by the Germans. All right, let's stop and think. How did this policy of appeasement encourage Hitler to continue his aggression? And tell me a little bit about this appeasement policy. Do you agree with this policy or do you not agree? And tell me why. So go ahead and stop your video and answer these questions right now. All right, so let's kind of look at what the West is thinking about this war. As we know, Britain and France are keeping up with that policy of appeasement, and they're not standing up to these fascist rulers. And like I said, they're doing it to keep peace. They don't want to start another war, because that was the whole goal after World War I, was to create a peaceful solution to dealing with problems. The Americans, we are obviously practicing isolationism. You guys have probably heard that before. And this is the belief that the political ties to another nation should be avoided. We're going to try to avoid alliances. We're going to try to keep ourselves out of any kind of war. And so in 1935, when all of this aggression starts to come forth in Europe, Congress is going to pass 3 neutrality acts. And they're hoping that this will keep the United States out of foreign wars. And it's also going to make it illegal to sell arms or lend money to nations at war. So that's going to kind of be part of trying to keep the United States neutral. All right, so Hitler is going to continue to expand. He's going to continue to push his limits in Europe. In 1937, Hitler is going to announce his plan to absorb Austria and Czechoslovakia into the Third Reich. And the Third Reich is basically known as the German Empire. It's Hitler's empire. So he announces plans to take on Austria and Czechoslovakia, and then he announces his plans to absorb Poland and Russia. So in 1938, Germany enters Austria and annexes it, and this is actually violating the Treaty of Versailles that prevented this kind of an alliance between Austria and Germany. And then the Germans are going to move into Czechoslovakia, and they're going to demand the Sudetenland, which is basically land on this western border of Germany and Czechoslovakia. Everything here in bold is known as the Sudetenland, and Germany is going to demand that, and the Czechs are going to refuse to give in. However, Hitler is going to be able to eventually occupy Czechoslovakia. So Hitler is making great strides in conquering areas and annexing them into his Third Reich, or his German Empire. All right, so at this point, Mussolini suggests that Germany, France, and Britain and Italy meet in Munich at the Munich Conference. And this takes place on September 29th, 1938. And at this meeting, Neville Chamberlain, who is the British Prime Minister, is going to support that idea of appeasement to keep Britain and France out of war. So Hitler is going to be allowed to take the Sudetenland, and he's going to be forced to honor Czechoslovakia's new borders. However, he does not do this. Within 6 months, he goes in and takes over the entire Czechoslovakia. So that obviously was not effective. Mussolini takes Albania, and the Germans are going to demand the Polish port of Danzig. So when the Polish go in to ask for French and British help, they are not going to get it, because the French and British are going to uphold that policy of appeasement. And Hitler knows that this is going to keep them out of war, so he knows that his demands are going to be met. So that is going to cause, this appeasement is going to continue to cause problems and tension. At this point, Britain and France tried to appeal to Russia, the Soviet Union, to help stop Hitler. Britain and France, they're going to be a little bit nervous about it. First of all, the USSR is going to be upset about not being included on the Munich conference. And also, Britain and France are not going to be totally trustworthy of this new communist government that's been put in place in the USSR. So Hitler and the Soviet Union are going to sign a non-aggression pact. And basically what it does is it says Germany would never invade the Soviet Union, and they divide up Poland between them. However, after that, Hitler moves forward to conquer Poland. And on September 1st, 1939, German planes invade Polish airspace and tanks go across the Polish border. And this is when the Germans are going to mercilessly bomb Warsaw, Poland. At this point, this is the beginning of World War II. Germany's invasion of Poland kind of marks the entrance of the British and the French because they know that they can no longer withhold Hitler with that policy of appeasement. So at this time, Britain and France are going to officially declare war on Germany September 3rd, 1939. Despite this, Poland is going to fall to Germany 3 weeks later. So now you're going to have the outbreak of World War II in Europe. All right, so now we're involved in a full-fledged war. Just to let you guys know, I know we've talked about this in class, but we know that the Axis powers are Italy, Japan, and Germany. That's the main powerhouses involved in the Axis powers. And the Allied powers are going to be Great Britain, France, the USSR, and eventually the United States is going to get involved and join the Allies. So now that we have a war started, this Polish invasion is going to be the first sign of war, this first aggression of war, and it's going to be the first example of the German military strategy, which is known as the Blitzkrieg. And you guys have probably heard that word before, but it literally means lightning war, and it was a new tactic of war to kind of bring in fast-moving planes, tanks, infantry, moving in very, very quickly to take the enemy by surprise. And so Hitler was able to be successful with that tactic because he could go in very quickly and just attack the enemy by surprise. So by September 17th, Joseph Stalin is going to start occupying that eastern part of Poland that he would agreed in the non-aggression pact. And he's going to begin annexing the regions of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia and kind of occupying those regions to get himself ready. And then you're going to have the British and French troops over stationed on the Maginot Line, which was literally a heavily fortified line that divided the French and German border after World War I. It was put in place after World War I to kind of keep that border very fortified and defendable. So the British and French troops are just literally sitting on this line of defense, and they're just waiting for the Germans to attack. And pretty much for the first part of the war, the Germans and the French and the British are just staring back at each other, and it's kind of known as the Sitzkrieg or the phony war because there's really no action happening. The Germans are on their fortified line, and the French and British, the Allies, are on the Maginot Line. However, this peace, this Sitzkrieg, ends when the Germans invade Denmark and Norway and are able to take control of those countries. All right, so Hitler, as I said, broke that peace, and he's going to come in, he's going to sweep across Holland, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and this is going to be a big blow to the French because the Germans are going to be able to move through these nations and squeeze through the Maginot Line and enter France within 10 days. So the Germans are able to enter France, and they have the Allied forces surrounded around the French city of Lille. At this time, a German victory is going to be inevitable. Belgium's going to surrender to the Germans, and the French are going to look like they're going to be defeated. The Allies try to escape to the French port city of Dunkirk, and in their assistance, the British are going to send 850 ships to their aid to try and transport French soldiers out of there. And this armada is going to be able to bring 338,000 soldiers to safety across the English Channel. And it's going to be called the Miracle at Dunkirk because many of the soldiers were going to be able to be saved from German aggression. However, after the miracle of Dunkirk happens, France is going to be destined for defeat. Italy is going to join forces, and they're going to declare war on Britain and France. Italy is going to attack France in the south. The Germans are going to take over Paris. And by June of 1940, France is going to surrender to the Germans and be under German control. So Germany is going to take control of northern France, and southern France is going to be headed up by a puppet government. And if this is just a photo you can see of the soldiers in front of the Eiffel Tower, showing that France has fallen to the Germans. All right, with France fallen, Great Britain is going to have to stand alone against the Nazis, and so that's going to be a task. And they have a new prime minister. You guys probably have heard his name and heard some of his famous quotes, but Winston Churchill is going to vow to never give in. Okay, he's a very strong prime minister, and he's not going to give in to Hitler. And so Hitler is now going to set his sights on invading Great Britain and kind of finishing up that job. And the operation is known as Operation Sea Lion, and the plan is just to knock out the Royal Air Force, which is the RAF, you'll hear me say that, and they're going to land over 250,000 soldiers on the shores of England. So the German Air Force begins with bombing Great Britain, and it was the Luftwaffe, and they start targeting airfields, aircraft factories. They're going to start with those, targeting those, but then they're going to focus on bombing the cities, and they're going to start bombing London. But the Royal Air Force, they're going to hit back hard because they've got two pieces of technology that are going to help them out. They're going to have what's known as a radar, which we know what a radar is, helping them track movement. And they're also going to have a German code-breaking device known as an Enigma. So they're going to have two pieces of technology that are going to help them out. And the Battle of Britain is going to last until May of 1941. However, Hitler is going to call off his attacks because these two secret weapons really helped the RAF to defeat the Germans. He's going to pull his attention from the British because he was not successful, and he's going to focus his attention on Eastern Europe and taking over the Mediterranean. The important thing, guys, about the Battle of Britain is that Hitler was not successful, and this battle proves that Hitler can be stopped. So the Battle of Britain, using those two pieces of technology, was extremely important because it shows that Hitler is stoppable, and that if they could, using technology and using their efforts, they could stop him from taking over all of Europe. All right, so Hitler's going to take his attention and he's going to turn it to Eastern Europe because he was not successful in the Battle of Britain. So Hitler is going to be an active force in the Balkan Peninsula. You guys remember the Balkan Peninsula from World War I. But in 1940, Hitler is going to begin planning to attack his so-called ally, the person or the country he signed his non-aggression pact with. He's going to plan to attack the USSR despite the fact that he signed a non-aggression pact with Stalin. So Stalin at this time is not expecting an attack. He thinks that he and Hitler have joined an alliance. However, he's about to be in for a surprise. So he's going to use the Balkan Peninsula in southeastern Europe, that Balkan Peninsula, as kind of a way to get into Russia. So you're going to have Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary. They're going to join the Axis powers because they're scared. And so they're going to join the Axis powers, and they're going to allow Hitler to use them as a way to get into Russia. Yugoslavia and Greece are going to resist joining the Axis powers, and they actually are going to fall to German rule. So Hitler is going to be able to dominate the Balkan Peninsula and get ready to attack the USSR. All right, the attack on Russia or the USSR is known as Operation Barbarossa. And Operation Barbarossa starts when Germans launch a blitzkrieg invasion in June of 1941. And basically, the Soviet army is not prepared. Okay, the Soviet army was not prepared for this attack. It was a total surprise using that blitzkrieg tactic. And the Germans are going to be able to push 500 miles into the Soviet Union. So the Russians are going to begin using their scorched earth policy. We've talked about that with other Russian battles. They're basically going to destroy everything in their enemy's path so that the enemy can't take advantage of their resources. And by September 8th, the Germans are going to surround the city of Leningrad, and they're going to be able to cut that city off from the rest of the world. And so Hitler's going to try and starve the city by destroying their food storage warehouses and trying to cut the city off from food. And the people are going to starve. They're going to end up having to eat cow and horse feed, and they're going to have to eat rodents. Okay? But after losing over almost 1 million people, they're going to refuse to fall to Hitler. So Hitler's going to move on to Moscow. And by December, the Germans had advanced to Moscow. The Soviets are going to counterattack, though. And guess what's on their side? That's right, the winter. Remember, we've talked in class so much about how this Russian winter is going to work to their advantage. And the winter's going to start setting in, except the Germans are going to get word from Hitler that says no retreat. The Germans are going to dig in about 125 miles from the capital, and they're going to stay there until March of 1943. At this time, about 500,000 German lives are taken with this operation. So that's not going to be necessarily a successful operation with the help of the Russian winter. And we'll talk more about how this Russian winter is going to assist Russia in this war. Probably wondering, what is the United States doing all this time? Well, the United States is still going to be very apprehensive about joining the war. Remember the neutrality acts that were passed before the war. But FDR knows if the Allies fall, if France and Britain fall, and USSR, if they are able to fall to Germany, then the United States would be drawn into this war. So he issues the Lend-Lease Act, which is just a piece of legislation saying that the president could lend or lease arms and other war supplies to countries vital to the United States. So obviously countries who are pro-democracy, countries who are going to go to promote stopping Hitler. So the Allies. And by 1941, U.S. ships are going to start escorting British ships carrying U.S. arms. And so Hitler at this time is going to start ordering the sinking of any cargo ships that he meets, knowing that most of these cargo ships are going to be carrying U.S. arms. All right, and this is just a political cartoon. As the United States stays neutral, it's still interesting to see that we're going to be involved with the Lend-Lease Act. So it just kind of symbolizes that we're sending a lot of our supplies and how conveniently they get over to England, even though we claim to be neutral. So at this time, when Hitler issues that order, Churchill and Roosevelt are going to meet. Winston Churchill, British Prime Minister, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President of the United States. They're going to come together and sign the Atlantic Charter, and that's basically going to uphold free trade and uphold the rights of other nations to choose their own government. However, on September 4th, German U-boats are going to fire on a U.S. destroyer in the Atlantic. And so the United States is going to be involved in kind of an undeclared naval war with Germany. However, the United States does not get officially involved with a declaration of war in World War II until after the attack on Pearl Harbor, which we will talk about in class next time. All right, so stop and think. I want you guys to list me a couple of reasons here because there's lots, but what were some of the major factors that brought Europe into World War II? What brought this on, okay? And I want you guys to predict, how will the world view the U.S. policy of isolation? How is the United States, they're over here, we said they've stayed isolated. How is that going to change their view, other countries' views of the United States? And how is that going to fare for them in the future? Make a prediction based on prior knowledge, guys. I know you have it. All right, I will see you guys next time in class.